Industry Season 4 Episode SIXS, Dear Henry, is pure U-level psychosexual chaos and destruction. Industry's world is a house of cards, and everything is falling apart. Much of Industry Season 4 Episode 6 felt like a fever dream, hurtling us into what will surely be an outrageous climax. Zahn McLarnon and Franca Potenti talk Dark Winds Season 4, and the chemistry that drives a video player is loading. Play video, and that's more than fine and exactly what we'd come to expect from Industry. But didn't this hour feel as if something was missing? The transition from Industry Season 4 Episode 5 to this one felt a bit jarring, as if pieces of the puzzle were missing or aspects of the storyline were left on the cutting room floor. There are so many factors that contribute to this in various ways. For starters, it still remains jarring that for a character like Rishi, who had become so integral to the very fabric of this series, that his send-off, or rather the reaction to him, was so anticlimactic and unfulfilling. But swept up in discovering the truth behind Tender, it was easy to set that aside a bit. Yet this hour also gave us some of that Henry and Whitney dynamic we've sensed but never got to really see. There has always been a homoerotic tension building between the pair, with Whitney seemingly harboring strong desires for Henry and being drawn to him like a moth to a flame. He's drawn to Henry's particular blend of darkness and earnestness, his depravity in some regards but an unusual innocence in others. We use your personal data for interest-based advertising, as outlined in our privacy notice. And of course, Henry has always been the man of high standing, old money, titles, and power that he holds but is utterly incapable of wielding, which is equal parts fascinating and infuriating for those without such privileges. The top of the hour gave us a tease and taste of the eroticism behind Whitney and Henry's dynamic. Hell, Whitney was creeping on Henry in that shower like he was channeling Joe Goldberg, and the gay club dancing and debauchery were pretty intense. But it was also oddly tame for Industry. I understand that's wild to say when Henry got off in a damn glory hole, but while fantastically edited, I still expected more. While it's not a show that doesn't feel compelled to spell things out verbatim for its audience, it's also a show that has never shied away from letting its freak flag fly either, so forgive a girl for expecting a bit more action on the Henry and Whitney front before they got into destructive mode with one another. It feels like they really hyped up the homoerotic tension between this pair and underdelivered. Especially since Henry still leaned in fully with kissing that infidelity clause. Goodbye thanks to that glory hole BJ and threesome. That said, Whitney did give Henry vulnerability in a way he hasn't been with anyone else, and I don't think he even realized the significance of that, or that those flowers were for him. Whitney has been a predator toying with his prey when it came to Henry, and he's certainly been spinning the perfect web when it comes to getting between Henry and Yasmin and undermining her at every turn. Even on that front, Henry has felt some kind of way about Yasmin since Industry Season 4 Episode 4, or at least being more vocal about the things that he's always known to be true deep down. This hour catapults him into such a pronounced effort to cut her down to size that I wish we had spent a bit more time in that build-up mode. But he's been clocking the hell out of her, and he hasn't missed. Now, we have Henry fully succumbing to his proclivities and vices, free from the control Yasmin always deluded herself into thinking she had over him. But Henry, sad man that he is, was too naive to see that Whitney and Yasmin are one and the same, except Whitney is infinitely worse. He never saw that he was the plushie in some tug of war between the two for control over him. Because Whitney served his ego with affirmations, the implication of sexual interest, and the prospect of a friend. Henry was preening happily, believing he was really as brilliant as Whitney said and that he was doing something that mattered. And that this man, well, loved him, and it's satisfying in a way he doesn't get from Yasmin. It's actually sad. As Haley said, Whitney preys on fragile people, and who has been more fragile than freaking Henry? Or Yasmin, for that matter? He even thought he had Harper for a bit there. Although the two of them sharing that conversation was fascinating, not just because he belted out Whitney Houston's "I want to dance with somebody," but rather because it was one monster speaking to another, a sociopathic Harper speaking to a genuine psychopath like Whitney. Having Harper serve as an observer and truth-teller is fascinating in itself. Her interactions with and call-outs of Yasmin were equally compelling. "There's like no empathy left in you, is there?" Just an imitation of it to entrap people. Much of the hour was just people clocking Whitney as his mask started to slip, and who he really was came to light. His different stories about his background and childhood, for example. I chuckled when Henry asked, "Why does everything from your life sound like a bad novel?" The hour really had Whitney spinning on his wheels, as everything with Tender started closing on him, and he recognized that Sterntow were on the cusp of getting their wish. It was fascinating to see all the different versions of himself that Whitney played with people, depending on who it was. Whitney's almost put on naivete about that whole Russian connection and the fact that there were deadly ways of getting rid of problems versus all the veiled threats he unleashed on Tony Day. At that table he switched modes effortlessly. Whitney was plotting his escape plan if necessary and seeking out mutually assured destruction. There was just so much they gave us when it came to Whitney during this hour. Now, thanks to Haley, Yasmin is aware that Whitney utilizes his assistants like sex workers at his disposal to secure information and place people of interest in compromising positions for blackmail. He sicked Haley after Yasmin and Henry, and he got the results he desired. Apparently, there is footage of that threesome in Austria, in a Nazi castle at that. Yasmin is realizing to what degree Whitney goes to have power over people. It's very absurdly prescient, too. Whitney's taking an Epstein approach to using sex to compromise men with power to ensure he gets to have the most power in the room. And Haley is his Ghislaine who orchestrated these things for him, not some naive girl. Haley being part of the lure to do so, knowing enough to recognize her role in the ecosystem and that of those who came before her. And Yasmin, once again, is the poor fool who always thinks she has more power and control than she ever does. She thought the seduction of Haley and embarking on this problematic, power dynamic fueled bond were all of her doing. Little did she even realize that she was just a pawn again, and a sexual pawn for the umpteenth time. It really is tragic for Yasmin, who can never be free from that. Harper warned her about Whitney, but she was too busy caught up in the notion that Harper was jealous and trying to destroy her to take heed to anything she said. As a side note, I also expected so much more from Harper and Yasmin in building up to this tension that set them on two opposing tracks headed toward one another. Are there extended versions of these episodes? I keep feeling like I'm missing things. Whitney's penchant for baiting and blackmailing people reared its head with Eric, and we finally have more context around his sex with a woman who seemed young enough to be his daughter. Well, that's because she is young enough to be his daughter. Eric's sexual proclivities for younger women finally caught up with him, as he's now unknowingly had sex with an underage girl. I was still not prepared for what would transpire from that. They now have footage of him getting a blow job from an underage teen who he had calling him Daddy. The horrified expression when he put it all together was a gut punch. But credit where it's due, Eric is always self-aware about not being a good person. He knows he's done enough that his chickens could very much come home to roost at some point. Whitney thought he had him during that CNN segment because he likely thought Eric would be rattled enough not to come for Tender. Except Eric pulled an Eminem in 8 Mile move and owned that he's a terrible person with self-motivation, but that it didn't mean what he was saying was wrong. Or maybe it's more Katniss Everdeen: if he's burning, Tender will burn with him. People do, in fact, respond to such unvarnished truth and honesty. His willingness to keep it real while telling people that he's not just as bad as they say but probably worse makes him more credible than Whitney, with all his charm, inauthenticity, and word salad. I was not prepared for Eric's next move, though. Throughout the series, we've known he's a selfish, self-serving man who doesn't seem to care about anyone around him. Hell, he even admitted that he's a crappy father because he just doesn't seem biologically capable of caring about his own children. But he cares about Harper. Eric loves her. The twins are a biological obligation, but Harper is his true legacy. He was willing to take his own kids' future away from them, and his own to pour into making Harper's dream come to life. And he's dissolving his partnership with her to protect her from the fallout if and when that video comes out. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.